a sophomore BCE major, and today I will be introducing Lorrie Boula. Lorrie Boula is a 20-plus year veteran of the music and entertainment industries. 10 years ago, she started her work in the world of street art and continued to work with musicians. She is now president and founder of Soul Kitchen Music, an artist management company that represents Chuck D, Mark Jenkins, Public Enemy, and DJ Lord, among many others. Boula created the largest street art and contemporary art festival in the U.S., featuring Shepard Fairey, Keith Haring, Space Invader, and more. Her impressive collective of experience in the music world, a highly competitive industry, proves her undeniable talent, drive, and knowledge. She persisted through and prevailed on the front line as a leader in multidisciplined creative and business spaces. Today, we invited Lorrie to discuss the elements of her success and give some insight into what it takes to be a successful executive and how to navigate a competitive and often predominantly white male industry. Personally, I find her career as a creative professional and as an activist very compelling and impressive. She blazed past barriers, was knocked down, and valiantly got back up again. I introduce and welcome our second keynote speaker, Lorrie Boula.
Hi, everyone. That was quite the introduction. Thank you so much, Chloe. I appreciate it. It's always weird doing these things, talking to your computer, but here goes. So I'm going to talk briefly about a little bit of my history. I started in the music business so long ago that there was no Spotify, there were no cell phones, there was no internet. It was a completely different business when I started, and in some ways, completely the same. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about artists and talent. But as you heard earlier in earlier's panel, now it's more about analytics and social media. Those were not the things that people thought about when they were signing artists to record labels. What they really thought about was whether or not the artist had talent or vision and a personality, which I think is still really important. But now, of course, things like metrics and data and social media plays a huge part of it. And I have mixed feelings about that, which we can certainly discuss later if anybody has questions about it. But so I actually grew up as a poor kid in the South Bronx in the 70s. And then the reason why I mention that is to show the juxtaposition of how I found myself in the music business. I wasn't even aware there was a music business when I was growing up. I had no idea there was an entertainment business or how to get into it. And sometime in my teens, my family moved to Los Angeles, and I started being exposed to this industry that seemed completely unknown and magical and as far away as Mars. And I had always been obsessed with music. And I decided that I was going to try to give it a go and work in music. And my first job, actually, because I've done almost every job in the music business, was working at a warehouse, an actual physical fulfillment center warehouse called WEA, which was Warner Electro Atlantic. And we literally boxed up vinyl cassettes and CDs and sent them to record stores around the country. And I would like to thank my friend Kim Cameron for that, for giving me the suggestion to work there. And I thought it was the coolest job ever. We could look however we wanted. We were boxing up music I loved, some music not so much, but mostly music I loved. And from there, I was able to meet a lot of record label people, and I asked questions. And I think one of my biggest pluses that has served me my whole life, and especially my career, is that I always ask questions. I never think that I'm the smartest person in the room. I never think I know everything. I want to continually learn and absorb knowledge from other people. So when I was at WEA, that's what I did. So I remember meeting the Geffen Records people. I remember meeting the Warner Records people, the Electro Records people, and I just tons of questions. And the advice that I was given at that time, the best way to get a record label job was to either intern and or work at, believe it or not, Tower Records, which I'm sure is not something that's on most of your guys' radar, being that it went out of business long before. But so I did that. And I got a job at Tower Records as a buyer, which meant that I actually bought a lot of the imports that Tower was bringing in for its section. And then I met more label people. And then I went from there and I went on to Geffen Records, which was my first sort of big record label job. And at the time, Geffen Records was indeed Geffen Records, and David Geffen was very much in the building. And the big artist at that time was Guns N' Roses. and then Fast, and then a small band called Nirvana that nobody thought would do what they did, even though I was already a fan and had their Sub Pop record. And as they exploded and Sonic Youth continues to explode, my first sort of job at Geffen was to work with what were called alternative artists and to do the marketing, which was essentially records that they thought were too weird and didn't fit into the box. And believe it or not, there was a time when Nirvana was considered too weird and didn't fit into the normal top 40 box. So those were the first records that I had the privilege of working on, doing marketing and working with a great team in marketing and sales at Geffen, and got to work with those artists. And then I went from there to a relatively new label called Interscope, which was at the height of Death Row. Their big hits at that point were Dre's The Chronic. So now I'm really showing my age. I was literally 5 when I worked there. Not really, but sort of. And then there I worked with a bunch of the artists on Death Row. I also worked with 9 Inch Nails. So I worked with Snoop Dogg and 9 Inch Nails and Dr. Dre, and had like the time of my life, because it was at a time when also the record business was even more segregated than it is today. It was very uncommon for a record label to either have both hip hop and alternative music. And it was even more uncommon for people to work in both genres. But that was kind of my heaven, so to speak, because I got to work with both hip hop, and alternative artists, which to me was all just good music. And then from there, I went on to work at Warner Brothers, where I became a vice president. And I worked with a bunch of artists, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction, Corner Shop. I also worked on a bunch of soundtracks, the Howard Stern soundtrack, the Batman and Robin soundtrack, which is, some people think, the worst of the Batman movies. It was George Clooney as Batman. Who knew that George Clooney could almost ruin Batman? But that almost happened, even though I thought it was a pretty good movie. And I did that for about 6 or 7 years. And then as the music business was changing in the early 2000s, I just wasn't as inspired anymore. So I set out on my own. And when I first started Soul Kitchen, I was managing artists. Actually, my first artist I managed was Prince Paul, who is best known as the producer of the incredibly awesome first De La Soul albums, 3 Feet High and Rising and De La Soul is Dead. And I also did a lot of consulting, and I consulted for a bunch of people who were in the digital music space, which was a really new space at the time. And I consulted for eMusic and helped them put together their indie strategy. So at that time, literally, there was no streaming, there was no iTunes, there were no iPods. People were just starting to use MP3 players. And I consulted for a company called eMusic. And we very aggressively did licensing deals, but a lot of the record labels really didn't want to get in the digital music business and fought us. And I really found most of the record label presidents, and I'm talking about everything from Columbia and Epic and Sony to, many in the Warner system, didn't even have computers. They had no understanding of digital music. They had completely missed file sharing. They thought that if they ignored it, it would go away. Clearly it did not. So instead, we really aggressively went for indie labels, and we did deals with Matador and Touch and Go and Quantum and Def Jux and a bunch of the smaller labels who literally just gave us the ability to license their music and turn that into digital. And the irony of that is that eMusic was offering 50-50 profit splits. And had the major labels entered into those kind of deals, they'd be making literally something like 10 times what they make now through iTunes. But it took iTunes several years later and the power of Steve Jobs to sort of get the record labels on board and things like iPods. But it's funny how you see, or how, as I've seen, people think that they can ignore technology or ignore things changing. Things are going to change whether we ignore them or not. So we have to figure out how to embrace them and work within them. So anyway, and then I went on to, manage and work with Shepard Fairey for over a decade, and to work with Raphael Sadiq, and worked with him while he was composing music for Insecure, and also worked with him to get a Grammy nomination for his song with Mary J. Blige that he did for Mudbound. And then I've worked with Chuck D and Public Enemy, as already mentioned, and also Prophets of Rage, which is Chuck D's group with the other members of Rage Against the Machine that they were doing in Be Real from Cypress Hill. So I've done a lot of different things. And in that time, I also, as mentioned, produce Art Alliance, which is one of the biggest street art festivals at the time. In 2013, we did in Chicago, and we had partnered with C3, who are the owners and producers of Lollapalooza. And since that time, I've also co-founded and started another business a couple of years ago, quietly during the pandemic, which was my pandemic pivot, called Channel Zero. And that production company, we have a new TV show that we just announced, a 4-part docuseries with the BBC in the UK and PBS here. And the tentative title is Story of Hip Hop, or I think it'll be called Fight the Power. It's a 4-part series in the history of hip hop told as revolution. And then we've also already produced several podcasts, the newest one being Songs That Shook the Planet, that's on Audible, but also produced a podcast on The Clash that was on Spotify, and a podcast on the Knicks, who have been breaking my heart since I was a child, but yet I can't walk away. So I've done a variety of different things in literally almost every job in the music business. And I hope that, I answer any of your guys' questions, but more importantly, I hope I inspire you to realize how a poor kid from the Bronx like me, who didn't know there was an entertainment business, could have had such a pretty long and in many ways, a career. I don't want to say stellar or impressive. I want to say a career that has made me really happy. And I've worked with some of what I think the most important music and art, street art artists that have existed and probably will ever exist. And I feel really blessed by that. So I think it really does go to show with, asking the right questions and working hard and just having a vision that you can do these things. So I think at this point, I'd kind of like to open it up to any questions in case you guys have any.
Sorry, hey, Lorrie. So, can I see me? Can you see me?
I didn't talk about the activism, should I? Or is that?
Yeah, I mean, we can happily, we can get into it together. Might be a little,
okay, great.
A little bit more fun. Hold on, I'm just gonna change this real quick. There you go, so everybody can see you. There we go. So thanks, Lorrie, for that intro. I would, your acumen as an executive is well documented, cannot be debated. But I would like to, poke you a little bit and talk about your activism and how you sort of use some of that influence in other spaces that maybe everybody wasn't in when you got there.
Well, the thing about, I don't think of myself as an activist, even though I guess technically I am. I just think of myself as somebody who cares and wants to make a difference. And I started doing it, I don't want to say accidentally, but almost accidentally in the mid 80s. When I was a teenager, I had a bunch of friends who died of AIDS. And it was a time when Reagan was president, and I found his stance, one of which being that he wouldn't even mention AIDS, he wouldn't acknowledge it. And I just found it unacceptable. And I somehow made my way and became friends with a bunch of ACT UP people and found myself doing stand-ins and sit-ins and things with ACT UP. And that was sort of my first. But then I also realized by doing that one person can make a difference. You think that one person can't make a difference, but one person can. And of course, then if you join with a few hundred other people, you can. And then from there, I remember, protesting everything from the first Gulf War with Bush in the early 90s, and then trying to then learn the system a little better, because I think so many of us, at least for me, think like you vote for the president and you're done. But there's a lot of things that happen on the local level that we need to get involved in, but that's not necessarily something I feel like we're taught. So I started learning about that. And by the mid 90s, I was starting to work more with, different, everything from local coalitions to causes I believed in to, even things as may not seem as important, but like, getting parking sort of zoned. So those things are important when you live in that community. And then of course, by the early 2000s, I found myself again protesting another Bush who was going to war, which was, George W. at this point. And at that point, because I'd worked in the music business so long, I started using those relationships. So in the early 2000s, before I even worked with Shepard, but we were just friends, we started putting together these gigs that were anti-war, and we would take all the money and actually just make more anti-war posters for him so he could go and fly paste, and wheat paste whatever city he was in. We literally took the money from that and did that. And all of the artists were cool, not only cool with it, they were happy. And then of course we had, voter registration at those shows. So we did it in a very grassroots way. I mean, I had no idea, I just thought, even if we're only raising $10,000, that's what we did. And then from there, it just sort of snowballed and kept growing. And by the time that I started working with Shepherd, and I've heard the Hope poster story told many times and mostly wrong. I mean, what really happened was Shepherd was really early on Obama and he believed in him. He was not commissioned by the Obama administration. It was something he truly just believed in. So he made this poster. And at that point, the best thing that I could do was get out of the way. He then gave it away as a free download. And literally the image, like literally broke the internet. Well before Kim Kardashian's behind ever thought to break the internet, the Hope image totally did. And people were just passing it around. It was completely viral. And by the way, Obama didn't even have the nomination yet. That's how early Shepherd was. It was still a two-person race between Hillary and Obama. And to be honest, I wasn't sure about Obama because I didn't know if he could win. Anyway, so what ended up happening with the Hope poster is, Shepherd and I talked a lot about it, but it was really Shepherd driving it and me staying out of the way and helping him and amplify, which is sometimes what a manager does. A manager can sometimes kill a good idea an artist has by having them sort of either overthink it or talking them out of it. But sometimes you stay out of the way and just amplify. And that's what I did with the Hope poster. So Shepherd continued to make a ton of posters, and he would take the money and put it back into the machine and make more posters. So literally anyone could hit him up. Anyone could call us and say they were doing a cocktail party in the middle of Minnesota, and we would ship them posters. And all of that was funded by prior poster sales. So that was really what happened with the Obama Hope poster. And at some point, our good friend Yossi Sargent, who was Shepherd's publicist, had a relationship with somebody in the campaign, and then they started adopting the image officially. But there was a ton of grassroots that happened before them, but that also shows the power of one person. Literally Shepherd making the poster, having no commission, us having no relationship to the campaign, and him just doing him and me helping amplify it, and the rest of the team who were amazing that work at Obey. And that's what that became. And then of course we started working a little bit more closely with them later when he got in, but with all things in politics is, it can be heartbreaking because you think change doesn't happen overnight. Change is incremental. Things are difficult. The president is not the emperor. He cannot just make things happen. There's a whole system, and, we can talk about that legacy, but that's a whole thing. And then most recently in 2020, I jokingly said, I put the band back together again, but it was a bunch of other people Eugene Jarecki and Amber Fry McReynolds, who were amazing thinkers. And we started thinking, what can we do? Because we can't have 4 more years of Trump. We just couldn't take 4 more years of the hatred and the intolerance. So we came together and they came up with the good idea, and I just helped give it wings, which was we were going to reach out to arenas, which nobody had ever done, and try to turn arenas into polling places. Because one of the big problems with our democracy is there aren't enough opportunities or places for people to vote. And so we came up with doing that. And by the end, we had about 35 arenas around the country, who were on board. But again, that was just some people who were civilians, not in politics, having this idea, trying to figure out how we could get to people. Doc Williams was one of the first people who sort of unofficially joined our board to help us. But we did meetings throughout all of it with everyone from LeBron James to, at the end of it, everyone from Leonardo DiCaprio to Eminem were helping even talk about the messaging on social media, because the first challenge was, okay, we have the Atlanta Hawks arena on board, but how do we now tell people they can go vote there? So it was just really a lot of, it was like my second job for the longest time. And something tells me I'll be doing a second job again in a couple of years because we have some real problems. But, I also want to say as well, if you think your vote doesn't make a difference, I understand that, but it really does make a difference. And I can tell you that while some of us sometimes overthink what our vote does or are disappointed, the people who want to take away everything from gay rights to women's rights to people of color's rights, they're the most active voting pool ever, which is why we keep having these problems. I think I was muted. I don't know if that matters, but.
No, we got you.
Okay, so that was a long, short answer. I just wanted to cover it all just in case. So I'm sure I missed some things. I apologize if I was long-winded.
No, don't apologize. It's fantastic. So I have a question, but I'm going to jump to, there's a student question, and Jess is going to come up later with a bunch more. But This question here asks, does your creativity fuel the activism, or does the activism fuel the creativity? So I'm just curious, is like the chicken or the egg with you?
It depends. I mean, sometimes like when I first started doing these, like, I guess these events to raise money for Shepherd to make posters and us to do the anti-war stuff, it really came about identifying the problem, which was the war, and what can we do using our network? And that's when it got sort of the creative part. Obviously with Shepherd and the Obama Hope thing, obviously that's what he does. He's a creative person. So for him, it was the creativity first, and then me figuring out how to, alongside him and the rest of the Obey team, how we amplified it and what we did to try to make a difference.
Thanks, Grace. I want to pivot to a little bit of industry stuff, and I see more questions popping in about the activism, but we can get back to that. One of the things that I admired, we were talking about this yesterday, is really just your tenure, how long you've survived, and how many people have not survived, in the business. But you are in spaces where oftentimes people do not look like you. Maybe they're not from the Bronx, or they're not women, or they don't identify as white, whatever the case may be. But I've seen you move effortlessly and gain the respect of all these sort of different groups. So I'd ask for you to speak to that, because we try to teach that as best as we can, this be comfortable being uncomfortable, learn how to, communicate and do that very much. So I wonder if you could kind of look back at yourself and talk us through, how did you develop those skills, and, how useful they have been?
Well, I think you said something really important. I think a big part of it is you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to have, and I feel really lucky, or maybe lucky is not the right word. There's certainly many things I don't have, but I've always had a really strong sense of self. And I think if you can really get right with yourself and where you're trying to go, and you look at everything else as a distraction or how you have to navigate it, I think that's really helpful. So, when I started in the music business, it was 1988. There weren't really even women, I shouldn't say really, there weren't women presidents of record labels. Like, that didn't happen. There was no one I had to mentor me. There was no one I had to sort of reach out. Women were, secretaries, and they were called secretaries, and they weren't even called assistants. And that's kind of what you did. And it was really, it's still a pretty male dominated and predominantly white industry, but then it was like the women were secretaries and the dudes were everyone else. And I just thought, okay, that's cool, but I'm not going to settle for that. And I proceeded to just work really hard. But it also means, and this is the truth, women and people of color have to work twice as hard and usually for half as much. And I don't think that that's, and I'm just being truthful, but I don't think that that's something that should prevent us from doing it. I think when I look back and I see how many women are presidents now, or senior vice presidents, or vice presidents even, I feel really happy that I was part of the sea change. And I've also worked really hard to lift other women and people of color up into positions and open doorways for them and make recommendations, because if I want it to change, I have to work towards changing it. And it's an ever evolving thing.
So you probably didn't hear our very first speaker, and I think it's great to bookend it. Christina Norman sort of made the opposite comment when she rose through the ranks of VH1 and MTV, that at that time, cable in those early days, that sort of patriarchy didn't want to go over there. So there were a lot of women doing this quote unquote new thing. So that played an advantage. But there is an there is a sort of, the sort of gender brutality that happens, in our business. But you were talking to me yesterday about how that potentially can be spun around and used as an asset. Can you speak to that thought?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think that one of the things that has benefited me and still benefits me, even though I have to be honest, I get cranky about what I'm about to say, is people will often underestimate a female. People will often underestimate a person of color. People will often underestimate, someone for their age. And, good or bad, I think it's good that I look younger than my years. So people don't know that I've been in the business as long, whatever. There's also that. So people are also ageist, is my point. So, right, you have all these things working against you, but I actually look at it as an advantage, because if you underestimate me, that just lets me sort of navigate you better. And that's how I use it. And I have to also be honest that there's times when I don't want to say I play up being stupid, but I've been known to sort of go along with it. If someone thinks it, go for it. Like, after I take your wallet and all your shit, you're going to know I'm not. It's all good. Like, I'm not worried about it, you know? It's a little Bronx in me. Sorry, guys. You know,
That's that South Bronx stuff.
Yeah, little South Bronx. Sorry, but, you know, it's okay.
I mean, no, it's true. I mean, there's a little bit of art of war in there, right? As when you're strong appear to be weak, and then catch them on the back end. So, if I can also to think about trying to connect the curriculum to your career, we also like to talk about teach our students to be industry agnostic, right? To be able to move through the creative industries wherever, you know, whatever that may be. And again, you got label work, you got talent, you know, artist management, talent representation, event production, tour management. You do the things that we try to talk about. How do you do that? Where did you learn those skills? And how do you, you know, talk to Chuck about, you know, the Prophets of Rage tour, you know, in the beginning of the meeting, and BBC and Audible, you know, at 1:45? How do you switch your brain on and off for success?
You know, my brain, probably like many of people's, is nonlinear, so it's kind of a little all over the place anyway. But a lot of the things that I learned from doing, you know, I wasn't kidding, and this one of the reasons why I gave such a sort of long-winded intro. I've literally done almost every job in the music business, and the way I learned to do it was by doing it. And also by asking a ton of questions. Like, I really feel like, and I said this in the beginning, one of my biggest strengths is I love learning, and I'm not put off by new things. So whether that new thing is an NFT or crypto that I've been in the space for several years now, or the new thing is streaming at the time, or it's how we pivot during the pandemic and actually make the content, which, you know, technically I had been executive producing music videos when I was at Warner's. So you learn how to do it. And the only difference was at Warner's, you know, we were making throwaway videos for $300,000 each. And now you make a video for like $10,000 and you think like, wow, that's a big budget. So, you know, it's just kind of learning and asking questions and being in the environment, you know?
Yes, absolutely. This concept of asking questions, I'm sure the people streaming and checking us out are like, yeah, that's the fourth person to say that, right? And it's sometimes hard to ask that. So within that spirit, if people have questions, drop it in the chat streaming, and people can come up here and ask them live before we get out of here. But you know, again, like Lorrie, you being it's relatively effortless, and you are a humble person. But what advice maybe could you give to a student, a graduate student or undergraduate student, who may even be hesitant to stick their hand up and say, I don't know something? How did you get over that hump? Or was that never a problem for you to speak up in the middle of a meeting?
You know, no, it was something that I've never been good at being sort of like quiet and invisible, which is what women are supposed to be. I've never been good at that. So I've totally failed at that, which had served me. But I have to also say that, you know, I really believe, and maybe it was a lot of my parents, even my mom used to always say, there's no stupid question. And I think that served me, because I'm going to tell you, and I've been in the room and had meetings with some of the smartest people in the bit, like in not just in our business. You know, I've worked for David Geffen, I worked for Jimmy Iovine, I worked for, you know, Steve Berman was my direct boss, but Jimmy was in the office every day yelling at us. Like, it was a real thing. And, you know, then I worked with Mo Austin and then Stephen Baker at Warner Brothers. But the thing too is, even those guys, you know, I don't care if it's, and I'm not sure how familiar students are with David Geffen. If you're not, you should Google him and watch the Netflix doc. Is really great. But, you know, David used to say, if you're the smartest person in the room, get out of the room. And he gave me that advice really early. And then Steve Berman gave me some other advice I thought, which was great, which is when I was doing marketing, I didn't want to work on a record, which sort of relates to this, but I think is really interesting. And I was kind of being fussy about it. And he said, if you really want to be a great marketing person and a better record label executive, you learn how to work every kind of music, whether you like it or not. And I was like, and those are words that stayed with me. But really, the smartest people, Steve Jobs, David Geffen, I don't care, Tim Cook, those are people who are asking questions. Because if you go into it with an arrogance, like you know everything, you're never going to learn. And not only you're not going to learn, we use the word learn, and I think sometimes it feels like, ignorance the opposite, and that's bad. But learning never ends. So all of these things are experiential and experienced. Everything we do, speaking is learned. Speaking another language is learned. Driving a car is learned. So you have to think of it in that way and get out of yourself, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, that's that thing about if you're the smartest person in the room. That I said that in the meeting yesterday, and then if everybody's thinking that, then we're all looking at each other, of saying, "Well, I don't know this, you know that," and then we get into collaboration. But before I get off on that tangent, I want to bring you. You kind of teed up the question I want to have before Jess comes in with some of the student questions. Was this breaking down of genre walls? Like, I don't know. I mean, I know who you work with and the music you love, but the idea of like, Lorrie is a hip hop or an alternative, it's like, yes. So you have somebody even like a Chuck with the Clash podcast, which I highly recommend. Whether you're a Clash fan or a PE fan, you will learn something. But this breaking down of these genre walls, not easy. When you say it, it'll feel like it was easy, but I know it was a big lift at the labels, or maybe it's a big lift to make sure people understand how to market like a Chuck or Zach, who have, cross races and genders and international. But what's the secret or the magic to, allowing your clients to appeal to different audiences, or breaking down these genre walls that were meant to keep us separate? Why are you so good at sort of jumping over them, to butcher the metaphor?
I think I'm good at jumping over them because I don't think they exist. They've been made up, and it's something we all deal with. And, it's actually a lot better now than it used to be, as we know, but it used to be even worse. But I've always loved music, and, hip hop is my first love because growing up in the South Bronx, but certainly I was as much a punk rock or an alternative music kid as anything else. And to me, those things didn't compete. They lived on the same plane. And so I think that, because of things like Spotify and even iPods, which I know no longer really exist, but because of things like playlists and Spotify, the genres have gotten more crossed. But even at some radio formats, they're not as crossed as they, people don't really know how to kind of make it work. But I also think that there's a lot of preconceived notion of race that goes into the genres that, oftentimes you will see that, ridiculously smart, talented Black executives are allowed to work on hip hop records, but a lot of times they're not allowed to work on rock or alternative records. And no one says it, but it's said, and that's always really disturbed me. And it's just the same way as though, Black rock bands have really struggled, whether that was, you go all the way back in the day to Bad Brains, which I think were one of my favorite groups ever, to, even King's X in the 90s. And, it was funny because we were talking about Hootie and the Blowfish recently, like what an aberration they were. But I just think they were so corny that white people were like, okay, cool, whatever. No disrespect if you're a Hootie fan. But so often Black fronted rock bands were treated horribly at the rock formats too. And it's just this, it's this underlying expectation. And I don't want to say everyone's racist, but I'm sure that's part of it. But I think there's more of like an expectation of what people should listen to. Like Black folks listen to hip hop, white folks listen to, rock music and corny country music, and like never the two should meet, but that's not reality. So I don't know if I answered the question, but
no, it was. I guess the thing is, it's never been true. So you never indulged the fantasy in a sense.
No. And I think also the fact that I could also speak to the music and speak to the genre when I was in those rooms, I think, being informed, whether it was, when I was, working on the Death Row stuff, in addition to the Interscope stuff, I was also, there were times I remember, and I didn't know Tupac well, but I certainly worked with him a little bit. And Tupac would want me to tell Bronx stories because he had lived in the Bronx for a short period of time. And I remember like at one point he had walked out of the room and we were doing this thing and somebody said, "I can't believe Tupac's nice to you." And I was like, Why wouldn't he be nice? Like, I work at his record label, and it was like this kind of uptight white guy. And I wasn't sure what he was saying. Like, I didn't think he was racist, but he was also intimidated by Tupac. And the other thing is, like, I'm not intimidated by gangsters, whether that's good or bad. So, like, just who I am, I'm sure that also helped me navigate the space, like, oh, you have a gun, that's cool, like, whatever, like, I've seen guns before, you know what I mean? It doesn't bother me because of who I am. Not that I'm saying it's a great thing. I'm just saying, I'm not intimidated by it.
Yeah. I think that guy was definitely racist, by the way. Who said that about
Well,
Tupac.
probably. He had a lot of problems. He had many problems. So let's give him racist as well. He was also misogynistic. He was a bit of an idiot. He wore Dockers. He was just a problem overall.
He wore Dockers. I have khakis on right now, Lorrie. Be nice to me. All right.
Well, I can't see them, so it's all good.
But no, there is, I mean, all jokes aside, there is a sort of that stereotype of that you're this damsel in distress. He's this hypersexualized, inhuman, and really you're an anti-racist intellectual, and Tupac is a, politically educated, advocate. It's just not what it is. They think of what it is.
I will say Pac was a crazy flirt, but he flirted with every female. So I did not take it personally. And I will also say this just as a footnote, because I think it's really important, that in my experience, and it's documented, there are more female managers in hip hop than there are in rock or alternative music. And I have a whole theory about that, but I'm not actually an anthropologist. But really part of my theory is a lot of white males have been raised in a white male patriarchy, and they're just, whether or not they realize it, I don't know if that makes them sexist. I don't think they're as comfortable with a woman being in power. And a lot of people of color are raised in a matriarchy, and they are just comfortable with it. So when people talk about sexism in hip hop, I get a little upset because I've actually been more respected in hip hop than in a lot of rock and alternative spaces, to be honest. So, it's like, again, these sort of preconceived nonsense notions that people have.
I'm with you on that. I'm going to bring Jess up to get some of our student questions before we get out of here. But I do have a theory. I mean, you know Ebony, who ran the festival with us. She was way more effective as stage manager, being face-to-face with talent, than I ever was. There is this sort of feminine energy that I've literally seen, not to be too simple, it just cuts through the noise in ways that sometimes men can get bone on bone. So we should get
but I don't even just mean the pissing contest. I mean, yes, men do a pissing contest for sure, but I'm telling you that there are more female managers, and I don't mean day-to-day manager in hip hop, I can literally name one female manager in rock and alternative at this moment. Maybe two if Susan Silver is still in the business. I don't know if she is. And literally, I can name 5 or 6 without trying very hard in hip hop. And that's the way it's always been. Yeah. So there's some other thing of people talk a lot about the misogyny in hip hop. And look, there's a lot of, obviously there is that, and there's a lot of, sexism in that behavior, but there's also tons of it in rock music. Let's not kid ourselves. So it's not worse than hip hop, but I'm telling you, there's more women in power in Black music spaces. So I hate when people talk to me about, how horribly women are treated in that space, because it's not 100, you know?
No doubt. So listen, Lorrie, I'm gonna pass you off to Jess, our marketing manager, and you don't have to look at my face, but I'll be back at the end. But Jess, please.
I'll see you in your khakis later.
Yes, the khakis moment.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I will be
asking nice to meet you.
Likewise, I will be asking you the student questions. So the first question is from Michael. What does your day-to-day from project to project look like?
It's a really hard question to answer, because the thing about being a manager is it doesn't matter what I think my day is going to be. It's probably not going to be that. And what I mean by that is, I can plan it out and think I'm going to just respond to a bunch of emails and we're going to get X, Y, Z done. And then, one of the biggest things about being a manager is, spinning plates or juggling chainsaws in real time. There's always new things coming in. So it's hard for me to answer, but I would say, my day-to-day, every day, the one constant is that it's, there's usually a lot going on and there's multiple things always going on. I just got to figure out how to sort of juggle them and not let them, hit the ground, kind of thing.
For sure. Thank you so much for that one.
Our second question is from Sophia. What is your take on Spotify, Joe Rogan, Neil Young, India Airy drama?
Well, I think that this goes back to even what I was talking about a little bit in activism, whether you agree with it or not. Neil Young has an opinion, and he's an artist, and he can have a say in how he wants his art delivered, and so does India Airy. And as for Joe Rogan, I think this is kind of the funny thing about the internet sometimes. Joe Rogan's always been Joe Rogan, whether you like him or not. He didn't just suddenly become a bit of a misogynistic racist. He's that guy. So, in one hand, I wish Spotify would do more. On the other hand, they have quietly taken down over 100 of his shows, which I don't think they've been really public about on purpose, maybe. But I think that, as an artist or a human being, even if you believe in something, you should take a stand.
I love that. That was awesome. The next question is from Rachel. It seems like your experience in business acumen feed your activism, or is it the other way around?
I think my activism really, because it started in the way it did, just came really from a place of, again, being a human being, where I was losing friends as a teenager to AIDS. And at that time, AIDS was a huge crisis in this country. And it wasn't even something the president would utter the words. Like, he wouldn't acknowledge it. It was a huge problem. So I just started doing it. And then I've been able to use my, entertainment business relationships to help feed the activism. But certainly I think my activism comes from wanting to make the world a better place and trying to do that.
Oh, that's beautifully said. The last question I have from you is from Christina. What is it like on tour with icons like Public Enemy and Rage Against the Machine?
Well, I haven't technically toured with Rage Against the Machine, even though they are friends of mine. I toured with Prophets of Rage, which is a little bit different, and as most of the members, I guess, of Rage Against the Machine, besides Zach De La Rocha. Tour is, we all have a joke, people who've especially done this for a while. There's what people think tour is, which is like rah, and people like partying in dressing rooms. That's not really what's happening. What's happening is literally, it's a bunch of tired people, whether they're in their 20s or not in their 20s like us, who are getting on a plane or getting on a bus and going to the next city. And what you literally see on tour is you see the venue, the hotel. If there's a hotel, there's not always a hotel. And then you see the bus or the plane again, and then the next venue. A lot of times you don't even see more than like a block around the venue. So it's kind of this it's completely not fun like you would think. And so whenever you hear your favorite artist, they don't want to tour, I understand as a fan, but give them a break. It's actually really hard. But they're all really awesome people. So when we're having downtime, we're doing really not crazy things like partying in the dressing room, but doing things like, what books are you guys reading, and sharing like books we're reading and talking about Netflix. So it's like, it's kind of like how you are hanging out with your friends, but we're like trapped together for 6 weeks sometimes, and, good or bad, and learning about people's bodily functions, which is part of the bad part. But, there's a lot of stuff that happens.
Well, thank you so much. Those are all the student questions we have from the YouTube Live. I'm going to pass it back to Wes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Nice to meet you.
I hated going on tour back in the day. It's the worst.
And everyone thinks it's glamorous. It's just not.
Especially for the manager, because there's no relief. You're just advancing, collecting. Anyway, we could go on and on about that.
Yeah, we go on and on.
Well, Lorrie, listen, thanks again for taking the time, to take us out of here. I want to ask you, if you have sort of any parting shots or thoughts, because you are literally the last voice, that's going to wrap up our this year's conference, which is kind of cool for me. But as we think about documenting disenfranchisement and moving forward to enfranchising, you've talked a lot about it, but I wonder if there was maybe one parting shot or maybe a thought you didn't get to before we say goodbye.
Look, the thing I really want to say to people is, people will try to put you in a box. People will try to limit you. You're only as limited by what you believe in and who you are. Now, sometimes these people will present challenges. That's going to happen. But if you look at it more like a hurdle and something to navigate around, or through, as opposed to stopping you, that's going to be the thing that serves you. And I do also understand that at times it's really difficult, and it can really also be a little bit, I don't want to say depressing, but it can be a little bit depressing at times. So you have to sort of think about what you're trying to accomplish and where you're trying to go. And the truth is, whether it's the entertainment business or working at the, Clinique counter at the mall, there's always going to be idiots or people who present challenges to you, and you have to just figure out how to navigate it and not be stopped. Believe in yourself, believe what you're trying to do, and find also those people who will encourage you, because you will find them along the way. And not only make friends with them, but make sure you ask lots of questions and then also be a resource for the people who are coming behind you.
Thank you so much, Lorrie. And can I just add one more thing to that? One, I've known Lorrie for long time. We won't date ourselves too much. But I think you called me, it's like, oh, can I talk to you real quick about tomorrow? And 45 minutes later, I'm standing on the corner, just sort of riffing. So I know we could go on, but you did talk about, the need to respect incremental change and one thing at a time. And I just want to share with you the thought that I went home was, Chuck D, who's one of the most important people in hip hop. I think he's one of the most important people on the planet. In terms of same thing to giving a kid from the Southeast Bronx like myself, this courage that, knowledge of self and understanding really who I was in a world that was trying to suppress it is now why I'm here right now. So one song, right? You make Fight the Power or Bum Rush, Yo Bum Rush the Show, and bing, bing, bing. A couple years later, we're in a room full of people and broadcasting all over the world. So I just wanted to, you didn't say it, I wanted to say it, that's thought has influenced me, and the work that you have done is actively, what did you say last night? Putting the water on rock, I think was the metaphor.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was saying that, the thing about change, or even like these hurdles that I was talking about, change happens incrementally. It doesn't happen overnight. Yes, we hear the headlines of like a law or a bill was passed. That happens, and that can happen overnight. But change is normally slow, and it's one little thing at a time. And what I always like to think of is the metaphor that I used yesterday, and the one that I use a lot is, nothing is stronger than water. And not to be all Bruce Lee about it, but you have to be like water sometimes. And water not only it does wear down rock. Water will wear down rock by just doing it a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And that's how change, and that's how careers, especially careers that, have a little bit more obstacles, like when you're a woman or, you're a person of color, it just does. So you have to just be sort of steadfast and know that if you are tenacious and just keep going. I mean, that's also the advice that Shepard always gives. Shepard says, as an artist, tenacity is more important than talent, because you have a lot of rejection. There's a ton of rejection in this business and world. You have to just keep going.
Tenacity is more important than talent. Eugenia, you got that. We got to write that one down to tweet it out. So listen, Lorrie, thank you so much. I want to just give us a round of applause for Miss Lorrie Boula.
Thank you. Applaud yourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. We will see. Hopefully, we'll see you in person real soon. But take care. I'm sure I'll talk to you real soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.